Thanks, Michael, for starting off the session. And I just want to agree wholeheartedly with what Michael said that one of the greatest things about this seminar or this course has been the chance to talk to other instructors. And I'm really happy to continue that today. What I'm going to be presenting is more of a discussion, I think, of a work in progress rather than final thoughts. And so I really welcome discussion afterwards. So my talk is going to be about my experience with specifications grading in a lower division course, one for science and engineering majors, physical science and engineering majors, and one with a focus on biology majors. So the reason that I became interested in specifications grading is because my biggest passion is something called project-based learning. So in project-based learning, the goal is that students do projects that help them to learn the content. The projects have a number of requirements. So this is what we call the gold standard for project-based learning. But the idea is you want the students to be doing something that is authentic, that there's a reason beyond getting a grade for them to do the project. You want them to have some kind of ownership and to be able to put their own thoughts into the project. You want to allow the students to reflect and go through a process of revision, which aligns with what we think about in specifications grading, that we want students to grow from the experience. And we want the project to be around a challenging problem or question that requires that the students actually learn the content of the course to be able to do the project. So I've heard it described as sort of a Trojan horse that, students learn the content by doing the project. The challenge that many physics instructors face with project-based learning, and particularly those like me who teach large classes, is that getting students to do physics at the most basic level in and of itself is challenging. The standard of what happens in a physics class is that students do problems, they see examples in class, they do very similar problems for homework, and they're given tests with, again, very similar problems. And even after repeating the same kinds of problems over and over again, particularly in the non-majors class, but also in majors classes, students have a very difficult time even reproducing these problems that they have seen before with very small changes. So to be able to get students who are struggling to do that very basic level to the point where they can do project-based learning has proven to be challenging. And so my interest in specifications grading was the hope that specifications grading might make that ability for students to perform at that most basic level clearer for the students so that we could then take them to this next level of project-based learning. And so just to put that in context of Bloom's taxonomy, basically in my time at UCI, I've wanted to be getting to this create level at the top of Bloom's taxonomy. And I often find myself having a hard time getting the students even through the understand level and then to the apply level. So specifications grading, what I like about it is that what we do in specifications grading is that we give students assignments and we tell them what they need to do to earn credit on the assignment. And there is no gray area in the grading. They either meet these specifications or they do not. And if they don't meet the specifications, we give them a chance to revise and hoping that correcting their work will help bring them up to that mastery level where they can meet specifications. In some forms of specifications grading, students can earn not just a pass to meet specifications, but also a high pass. And so what I'm going to tell you about is the theoretical benefits that I saw with specifications grading, and then I'm going to give you my rating of how this worked out in practice, given these three benefits. So the three benefits, some of which were talked about in our class. One is that we can specify the grade requirements so that they directly reflect our learning goals and hopefully make that grading process more transparent for students. The second thing is that we focus on mastery by giving students multiple times to do an assignment and correct if needed. We're signaling to the students that we really want them to get to a level of performance where they know this material well. And the third proposed benefit was that we would have fewer quibbles about points by having this mastery requirement and allowing students to revise. There'd be less arguing about how many points students got on specific exams. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I implemented specifications grading with my course before and after. So as I mentioned before, this is in a lower division non-major course. And what I've shown you here is the category of assignments in my course before I implemented specification grading, which I'm going to describe now. And then on the next slide, I'll show you how that was adapted with specification grading. So the categories of assignments that I have are individual tests, homework of various kinds, and then interaction and teamwork, which happens generally during class. Before I implemented specifications grading, I would give between 3 and 5 midterms each quarter. And I would drop the lowest one. These tests were 25% of their grade. And then there was a final exam that was 35% of their grade. They had various homework assignments. Some were pre-class assignments to get them ready for class, and others were problem sets that they do after class as follow-up to work through mathematical problems. They got a little bit of participation in class with the iClicker. They got participation for working with their teammates as long as they did so according to the instructions. And then after they would take each individual test, they would redo the test with a team, and they would get credit for their score that they earned together with the team. So one of the things that I never liked about this percentage grading is the asterisks. So the asterisks are here for the test and the problem sets that I would drop the lowest scores. That's in an effort to account for students having unexpected issues, getting sick, just to offer flexibility in general. But the thing that is difficult about those asterisks is that it doesn't give students a chance to redo. Instead of going back and reviewing material that they missed, it just sort of drops off the content that they're expected to do. The other asterisks that I didn't like are these asterisks with the teamwork. And so since students are in teams, I want to incentivize them to actually work together when they're in groups. A team evaluation works very well for this. And so what we have told the students is that if you're fully participating with your team, then you get the full credit for these assignments. But if you're not engaging with your team, then these scores can be lowered. And if you are really strongly helping your team, they can also be raised a little bit. But those asterisks were never easy to explain to the students, and it always created anxiety at the beginning of the quarter when students saw them. Okay, so the changes with the first instance of specifications grading in this course, the biggest changes is that you can see the percentages are gone. So for homework, we required them to complete all of the homework, and they could use a token if they needed to make up an assignment. For the tests, what we did was we moved to something called mastery quizzes, which is recommended in some forms of specification gradings. So the students would take these mastery quizzes, and if they didn't pass the first time at a 75 or 80% level, depending on the number of questions, then they would be given opportunities to retake the quiz. It actually says 3 to 4 retakes here. That it should be 3 to 4 attempts total, so 2 to 3 retakes. And then because of getting rid of the percentages, we're able to take things that are even worth a very small percent of the grade or an asterisk and actually just make them very clear criteria of the grade, which made the grading look more straightforward to students. So specifically, I was able to take the teamwork and tell students that they needed to have a team evaluation of being a strong contributor in order to earn an A, and slightly less so to earn a B. I'd like to mention here that, again, independent of specifications grading, part of my goal is to remove some of these high stakes tests in favor of projects. So that is something that also changed in the grading, but is not necessarily due to specifications grading itself. Okay, so that's an overview of my implementation of specifications grading. So the question is, did my implementation meet the specifications that I was hoping for? So what I would give specifications grading in theory is a high pass. I think that these ideas are grounded in good educational theory and make a lot of sense. But in practice, I'm finding it hard to implement them to actually have all of those benefits, and I will explain to you why that is. So the first factor that I mentioned, the first potential benefit, is that we are allowed here with specifications grading to specify the grade requirements that reflect our learning goals. And as you saw, I was able to remove the asterisks and those percentage, and specifically teamwork was more easily factored in. So in that way, I think specifications grading was good. But I also don't think that my previous iteration with percentages was too far unaligned with my learning goals. I am explicit with the learning goals with my students. Things that are generally more valued have higher percentages. The only thing that I think really qualitatively changed was the using of teamwork. But nonetheless, I think that was a benefit of specifications grading. So that's a high pass. The mastery focus. So this idea that students could work on correcting work rather than just dropping an assignment and losing a grade. So the positive here is that the revision of homework, I think, was a better learning tool than just letting students drop an assignment that they didn't do for whatever reason. It encourages students to engage more fully in the material. And in our class in particular, because we're highly based on teamwork, the homework doesn't just have a component of working individually, but they work individually and they submit their work before class. And then what they do in class is they talk about the work that they've done with their teammates. So part of what we did in specifications grading was if a student had to miss class, when they made that up, they did so by meeting with a member of the teaching team to touch base on those things. And that way, I think it was actually able to help the students to stay more engaged because they were getting checked up on in terms of their learning. The negative here, I think the biggest negative was the mastery quizzes. So for students who passed the mastery quiz on their first or second attempt, it did exactly what we were hoping. It lowered the stakes from being high stakes to lower stakes. But for students who did not pass on that first or second attempt and were taking it on the third or fourth attempt, particularly the last attempt offered in finals week, there's some argument that this testing became even more high stakes than it would have been in a traditional exam, because requiring mastery of the students to get 75 or 80% to get credit is a higher bar than they would normally have just to pass a class in a final exam of getting by with 50%. And even though this was not a majority of students, it was a significant concern for a minority of students. So that I see as a negative. The other thing is that I don't think this is due to specifications grading in particular, but in these COVID times, I am having just an unprecedented number of students having personal challenges, not being able to come to class, missing class due to illness. And so making up these things is just more challenging than it is to simply drop a score. Okay, and the last benefit that we had heard about was that there'd be fewer quibbles about points in specifications grading, and certainly there is less arguing about, single points on a test. But nonetheless, even when students have a chance to make up assignments, some students see this all or nothing grading as unfair on certain assignments. And I have to say that I see the point in that. In particular, with specifications grading on homework assignments, I require the students to fully complete the assignment to get credit. And if they don't complete the assignment, they don't get credit, but they can redo the assignment with a token. But particularly in these times where students are dealing with many, many different life challenges, there are some students who week after week are doing half or 3/4 of the homework. And under the specifications grading that I laid out, those students don't earn any credit unless they make it up. And I question whether that is what I actually want to have being reflected in my grade. And I instead have gone back at the end of the term and made some adaptations for those cases. But points does help to give a clearer way to deal with those students who haven't achieved mastery, but perhaps should earn some credit. So in conclusion, what I would say is that my implementation, I think in theory, I would give these things a high pass. But I think that it does fall into the category of requiring revision, specifically because of trying to implement the makeups for interactive learning and to account for students needing an unprecedented amount of flexibility in these COVID times. All right, thank you so much for letting me share my experience.